Is depression really caused by a chemical imbalance, or is that just something the pharmaceutical industry made up? This debate stirs up a lot of passion in both Christian and secular spaces. Stay with me and we'll see what some of the newer studies say. Hi, I'm Stacy. I'm a Christian, a pharmacist, and a writer. And on this channel, I help Christians think biblically and wisely about caring for their bodies to the glory of God. Today, I'm looking at one of the more controversial questions. Are antidepressants really helping people, or is it all just a made-up story? There's a lot to unpack in this discussion. And of course, there's no real consensus in the Christian realm about depression and medication. And there are very few Christians that would argue that no Christian should ever take medication. There really is strong resistance toward antidepressant medications among a lot of Christian leaders, and quite a few push back against their use, especially when the use is so widespread. And while very few will say that depression is a sin, a lot of people feel that it's wrong thinking, and they believe that Christians should exhaust every possible option with counseling before turning to any sort of medication. And it's not just Christians. There are a lot of experts in the secular realm that really aren't fans of antidepressants either. There are authors like Robert Whitaker in Anatomy of an Epidemic and James Davies in Cracked, and they postulate that the chemical imbalance theory was just an invention of the pharmaceutical industry and never good science. But of course, there's always another side, and the other side insists that depression is a disease, and they point to medications and how they help people, and they say that that's really one of the best options. So who's right? What's the answer? And how should Christians approach this sensitive subject, especially when passions run so high on this issue? So first, let's talk about the chemical imbalance theory, because that seems to be the sticking point for a lot of people. A lot of the arguments against the use of antidepressants often rest a large part of their argument on this issue alone. They state that the chemical imbalance theory has never been proven, and a lot of people, when they make this argument, they even go on to say that any effects we do see with antidepressant medications like SSRIs are likely just due to the placebo effect. Now, as a pharmacist, I've had people mention this to me, thinking I'll be shocked or surprised at this news. But in fact, I'm really not. It's just pretty common for us to only have theories or vague ideas about how medications work. But this theory does have more traction. We don't debate the mechanism of action of medications for high blood pressure and diabetes and things like that. And why is that? Well, I think a lot of this can be traced to a lot of the commercials we saw 20 plus years ago. And one of them is this ad for Zoloft. And it's often referred to as the sad blob commercial. And what it features is precisely what I'm saying. A sad blob moves across the screen. And while the narrator is careful to say the cause for depression isn't known, the screen then cuts to an animated synapse with neurotransmitters seen floating between the synapse with the word chemical imbalance on top of the screen. If you watch TV in the United States during this time, you no doubt saw this commercial. And if you listen carefully, they said just enough about the chemical imbalance just being a theory to be legal, but they definitely steered the viewer in the direction of believing that this was a fact. So what gives? Were they just making this all up to sell us more medications? Well, yes and no. We really didn't know then if people with depression really had less serotonin than those without depression. We just knew that giving these drugs and knowing that they probably increased their serotonin levels did seem to help. So it really was a reasonable deduction. It's just really hard to prove. We don't have a good way of measuring serotonin in the human brain. Now, I am certainly not privy to the marketing strategies of pharmaceutical companies, but I think it's fair to guess that they probably tested a lot of different strategies to decide which one made people more open to the idea of taking medication. But that was 20 years ago. Do we know anything more today? Actually, we do. But while we have some good evidence, the new evidence, they're just theories also. But what are these new theories? Well, there's been a lot of research into this in the last several years, and most of the studies have not been able to find a link between low serotonin levels and depression. And when those commercials I talked about earlier talked about chemical imbalance, that's what they were referring to, just the idea that people with depression might have less serotonin than other people do. These discussions tend to always bring up a lot of emotion and sometimes even anger from people who have taken antidepressants and felt better. And to to be fair, some of their frustrations are justified because sometimes people take these studies and then they unfairly assume that any effects of the antidepressants are just the placebo effect. People with depression, they're already burdened. Nobody wants to take medication. Nobody wants to be depressed. And when somebody suggests that maybe it's all in their head, that's hurtful and unfair. So what is the answer? Is there a biological component to depression? Are the effects of drugs like SSRIs just the placebo effect? Well, unfortunately, we still don't really know. We still just have theories, but there is some new research that has a different theory that I think might explain some things like why SSRIs take time to work, and they also might explain why things like cognitive behavioral therapy and regular aerobic exercise seem to be almost as effective or just as effective than SSRIs for people with mild to moderate depression. One interesting study was published in 2017 by Neuroscience and Behavioral Reviews. This study showed that what SSRIs might actually be doing is increasing neuroplasticity. Now, what's neuroplasticity? Besides the fact that it's hard to say, neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change its structure or form new pathways. We used to think that at some point in your life, your brain was largely fixed. And by fixed, I mean it's not going to change. But we are learning more and more that that's just not true. This also might be why, like I said, why cognitive behavioral therapy tends to work and why people find things like positive affirmations helpful, and also why people who approach tasks with a positive attitude tend to be more successful. We're kind of able to train our brain, so to speak. Now, I'm not saying that people who are depressed just need to think positively. I just kind of wanted to set up the study because what the study suggests, what it's saying that SSRIs might be doing is increasing neuroplasticity. Brain scans of people with depression did show they had less gray matter, and SSRIs helped this. Now, what do I even mean by gray matter? Gray matter is found in the outer regions of the brain. When we engage in activities that form new pathways, like learning new things or engaging in regular exercise, the brain's gray matter thickens in certain areas. Now, one thing we always have to be aware of, and we always have to keep in mind, that this could be a chicken or the egg thing. Did they have less gray matter because they're depressed, or are they depressed because they have less gray matter? Either way, taking SSRIs increase this. So this could be the explanation behind a lot of the things we already know. For instance, exercise also increases neuroplasticity, which might be why exercise helps depression. And this also could be part of the reason behind the delayed effects of SSRIs, because all this takes time. When I would counsel people picking up SSRIs in the pharmacy, I'd have to tell them it's probably going to be a month before you're going to notice an improvement. So what should we do as Christians? First off, if you're taking SSRIs, don't stop taking them without talking to your doctor. Stopping these medications suddenly usually leads to withdrawal symptoms, and you really need to talk to your healthcare provider so you can work out a plan how to best come off of it. Do you need to go on a longer acting medication? Do you need to go off slowly? How slowly? All of those things need to be answered. Don't just stop taking them cold turkey. Second of all, even though there might be a biological component to depression, but you have other options besides medication. Medication might end up being the best choice for you and your situation, but there are other things you can explore that might help. And even if you are on medication, counseling and a healthy lifestyle may improve your quality of life. So where does this leave us? We don't have all the answers, but we do know this. Depression is complex. It's not simply a chemical imbalance, but it's not just weak faith or wrong thinking. As Christians, we can receive both God's common grace in medicine and His sustaining grace in Christ. Medication can be one tool, but it's not the only tool. Counseling, exercise, spiritual practices, they all play a role. Our hope is not in serotonin levels or perfect mental health, but in Christ, who holds us fast even in the darkest valleys. I hope you found this video helpful. If you want to see more of my videos where I talk about how faith and health intersect in our lives, please consider subscribing. I post videos once a week and shorter videos throughout the week.